10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 312. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 312 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. It is the third week of the month, so you know what that means. We are going to be doing our lick of the month. And in this episode, we're going to look at one of my favorite saxophone players, Stan Getz. This was inspired by a recent YouTube video I did where I broke down a Stan Getz transcription. We're going to take a look at one of my favorite parts and figure out how to be creative with this line that Stan played. But before we jump into the show, as usual, just wanted to remind you that this is a listener-supported podcast, which means we do not have any advertisements on this show, except for this one right here. Instead, what we do is we choose to be supported by you, the listener. So if you like this show, if you feel like you get something out of it, you can support us on the Patreon platform, and you can find that by going to 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners, and getting yourself signed up to contribute a small amount of money each and every month. In exchange for that small amount of money, you do get a PDF and audio examples with every single episode. Plus, you get access to all the PDFs from all 312 of our back episodes. Wanted to give a quick shout out to our new patrons this week. Thank you to our new $5 patrons, Tony, L, and RJ. And thank you to our new $3 patrons, Will, Michael, and Richard. Thank you guys so much for becoming part of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson family. Hope you're enjoying your subscription. And again, head over to 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, sign up, and get instant access. So again, as I mentioned, this was an idea that I tried on the YouTube channel. And if you're not subscribed to my YouTube channel, you can find it by searching Nick Manella on YouTube. And that is a place where we do a bunch of extra stuff that has nothing to do with the podcast. So if you're in the mood for even more jazz education material, find that YouTube channel, get signed up, and you will get all those videos as well. So I was trying this idea where I put on a saxophone transcription on YouTube and reacted to it in real time, tried to highlight some of the coolest stuff and just basically show you how I kind of think about watching a transcription on YouTube or reading a transcription. And we decided to do this recording of Stan Getz with the Oscar Peterson Trio, a drumless group, over the amazing jazz standard Pennies from Heaven. And there was this one particular part that I thought could be cool to break down a little bit more on this Lick of the Month episode. So I want you to pull out your PDF because on the first line, I do have the original line as he played it. So let's listen to that really quick, and then we will talk about exactly what's going on, and then we're also going to talk about what we're going to do with this line and how we're going to kind of flip it into a bunch of new ideas that we can work on in our own time. Here's the line. So it's a pretty awesome line, and in the PDF I do have the actual chord changes that he's playing that over, but really that's not what I want to focus on in this episode. What I want to focus on is the underlying pattern that he's actually using. Now, what this pattern is something called Diatonic Triads, and that's basically where you take a key, in this case it's a major key, it's the key of F concert, and you build a triad off of each note. Now, you may have heard this pattern before. In fact, we've talked about it on the show before. Again, all we do is we build a triad off of each note, and so on and so forth. But the cool thing about triads is that you can play them in two different inversions besides root position. So there's a lot of possibilities that we can get from these diatonic triads. So if we look at Stan Getz's original line, what he's really doing is he's playing down, Diatonic Triads in the key of concert F, and he's playing this really, really cool pattern in first inversion, which means he's playing from the third. So basically what he's doing is he's going 3, 5, 3, 1. And then he's working his way down those diatonic triads. There's one where he steps outside of that 3, 5, 3, 1 pattern, but then he comes right back to it and continues that until the end of the line. So I was thinking to myself, all right, how can we take this Stan Getz line and how can we be creative with it and use it in our own playing? So what I wanted to do was illustrate a couple of different ways you could do this and how a line like this in a solo can inspire you to actually not just steal the line and put it in a bunch of keys, which is also amazing work. We talk about that all the time. But rather than that, why don't we take that line and try to come up with some of our own ideas based off of what Stan Getz was playing? Use Stan Getz as an inspiration, but then try to be a little bit original ourselves. So what I did was I came up with 3 more exercises based off of what Stan Getz was doing. So I figured, okay, he is using a diatonic triad starting on the 3rd and going 3, 1, 3, 5, and then working his way down through all the different diatonic triads. So what if we took that exact same pattern, but instead of going 3, 5, 3, 1, we went 1, 3, 1, 5, but then worked our way down just as he did. And what that's going to do is it's going to be a very similar line, but it's going to have some differences because we are playing it in root position instead of in first inversion. So that line, which is the second example on your PDF this week, sounds like this. So you can hear very, very similar, but as soon as you start on the root, the interval structure totally changes. So it's very reminiscent of the first line, but has some very different sounds to it because all the intervals are kind of mixed up. Particularly that last interval in the 4-note pattern is now a 4th instead of a 3rd, which completely changes the sound of it and the layout of everything that's going on. So there's the first example that I wanted to do. So now we've covered first inversion, root position. So now the only other place to go is second inversion, which is of course starting on the 5th. And this is going to mix up the interval structure again, give us another slightly different sound and slightly different approach. So here is the 3rd example on your PDF this week. So you can hear now we have a larger interval right at the beginning of each 4-note pattern, right? We've got that 4th at the beginning now. So again, very, very similar, but different. And it's these subtle differences, if you can really learn to master them, that are really going to give you a ton of flexibility in your playing and the ability to play really, really sophisticated stuff, right? People aren't going to know what you're doing that's different, but they are going to hear that you are doing something different, and it's very, very impressive. So then the last example is an example of going back to first inversion, but doing a different pattern. So the last 2 examples were pretty obvious, right? If we want to take that pattern and we just want to move it through the different inversions, these patterns make total sense. But then what I wanted to illustrate with this last one is that you don't have to stick to the exact same pattern. You can use the inspiration from Stan Getz to write a completely different pattern and maybe take those through a bunch of different inversions. Think about all the possibilities you have here with these diatonic triads. So what I've done for the 4th example is I've gone back to first inversion, but now I'm doing the pattern 3 up to 5, all the way down to 1 and back to 3, and then carrying that down through every single diatonic triad in the key of F major. So let's check out what this 3rd one sounds like. So you can hear that's a completely different pattern, but I'm still using the same concept. I'm taking those diatonic triads, trying to figure out an interesting way to play them. Then, of course, what I could do with that pattern is I could put that in the other inversions. So I could play that in root position. I could also play that in second inversion. And now I just have a ton of work that I can do. I have a completely different way to approach some brand new exercises just from that one simple phrase that Stan Getz played. And if there's a way of practicing that I think can benefit the most, it's practice like this, where I'm using some inspiration, but then I'm using my own brain and my own creativity to come up with my own spin on that little phrase that I stole from Stan Getz. And now I'm not playing it verbatim the way that Stan played it. I'm actually coming up with the Nick way to play that. And hopefully I can come up with the masterful flexibility and being able to think on the fly, on the spot, just the way that Stan Getz does, where he came up with this original beautiful line. So the moral of the story here is to just really be creative. And when you're doing transcription work or you're reading transcriptions or you're listening to music, figure out a little phrase and then figure out a dozen ways to flip that little phrase into something that is yours. And you will give yourself months and maybe even years of stuff to work on. Imagine doing all these derivations in all 12 keys. That's a lot of work, all from this little 2-second blip of Stan Getz's solo. The other quick thing I'll mention about this is that it's very, very inside the harmony. A lot of the lines that we do for Lick of the Month, we try to pick the most out or interesting line that we possibly can. And we're not doing that this month. We're picking a really, really simple line, but just masterfully played and something that we can unpack for a very long time and play in a bunch of different ways ourselves. So if you have any questions on this, let me know. You can get in touch with me on the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook page, or you can always email me at 10minutejazzlesson@gmail.com. I hope you enjoyed this. Maybe use it as some inspiration to be creative, practice your diatonic triads, and think outside of the box. So what I'm going to do at the end here is I'm just going to play a chorus or two over Pennies from Heaven, and I'm going to try to work some of these diatonic triads into my playing, just so you can hear how I might handle them when I'm actually playing over the tune. Hope you're all doing well out there. Thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, go over to 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, and you can get the PDF with all of these exercises that I played today. And to everybody that is supporting the show, thank you, thank you, thank you. We could not do this without you. All right, everybody, have a great weekend. We'll see you next week. Bye.